Today we're talking about behaviorism, which is observable and measurable human behavior. The two theories that are associated with this are the association theory and the reinforcement theory. The first theory, association theory, has to do with using classical and involuntary responses to elicit certain behavior. This is considered classic conditioning, where you use involuntary reflexes like salivation, nausea, increased heart rate, pupil dilation, things that you cannot control. They just happen, and using this to create a certain behavior. So you would take an object like a bell or a buzzer or something that has no relation to the subject, that they don't get any response from, and you add that to the certain involuntary response. This would be considered the unconditional stimulus, the involuntary response, and the neutral stimulus is the bell or the buzzer. Once these two are combined, it becomes a conditional stimulus, so that whenever a bell is rang, you begin to drool, just like Pavlov. And then eventually, the conditional response is the reaction without the stimulus. So there will be a bell and you'll drool, or there won't be a bell. The other theory is the reinforcement theory, and in this one it is all about operant conditioning, meaning you're using positive and negative reinforcement to create a certain type of behavior. Two theorists that are the forefront of this theory is Edward L. Thorndike and B.F. Skinner. For Thorndike, he created a theory that when a behavior occurs and it is given satisfaction, it's more likely to happen again than if your reaction was negative or dissatisfactory. For example, if a child is in the kitchen and touches a hot stove and pulls their hand back and they're burned, they won't touch the stove again because the reaction was negative. But if the child got an A in a class, for instance, and their parents gave them $20, the behavior of doing their work and passing their classes is the motivation for good grades and doing well. For B.F. Skinner, his whole idea was that learning behaviors are created through punishment and reward. He tested this theory by using Skinner boxes and rats. He would separate the rats so that no outside factors would influence them, and they wouldn't get any other stimuli from outside factors, and just focus on the task at hand, like pulling a lever or pushing a button. So when they did this, if every time they pushed the button they would get a reward, and this is how he explained how positive and negative behavior is put into play. So we have positive and negative reinforcement. There are the positive, which is appetitive, and it's the positive or pleasant reward, or it's the aversive and the negative punishment. So for positive and negative punishment, we have a positive that's a good response to it, or not a good response, but in this response, the action is so that you can correct it and do it right again. So if you're doing 65 in a 30 zone, you'll get a ticket so that you won't speed in that place again. So the response is not negative, but it's just to teach you and help you correct the behavior. A negative punishment would be a teenager sneaking out at night and having their phone taken away and they're being grounded. That is a negative punishment for a negative behavior, so that the teen will not sneak out anymore. There are different types of schedules that show how a behavior is, or how a reward is giving out. So we have the fixed ratio schedule. So for a certain amount of responses, you will get a reward. For every 10 responses, you get 1 reward. So when you do 10 responses, you get a reward. Or the variable, it's like the fixed, but there's not a certain amount of numbers that you have to give to get the reward. For the fixed interval schedule, it focuses on rewards being given after a certain amount of time and not the number of responses. So you have to do this for this amount of time and then you get your reward. For variable, it's unpredictable and you can't put it on a time factor. One of the examples that they gave was pop quizzes. Maybe you know that for every chapter there will be a pop quiz, but you don't know when that will be. So your response is to study and be prepared. And that wraps up behaviorism. Thank you.